Jerry. That will work. Blessings upon you. Multiple blessings upon you.
And your house. No.
And your spouses and your offspring and your ancestors, generations to come. I'm going to leave it here on the ancillary.
Good morning. My name is Holly Tangway, this morning's worship associate, and I want to welcome you to a very special combination service and presentation this morning. A warm welcome to everyone, to those of you who are here in person and those watching on YouTube. Everyone is welcome here, whatever your heritage, your age, your income, your abilities, and however you choose to participate, in person or on YouTube. This is a home for people who have some religious beliefs, or none, or who are eager to explore their spiritual life. As a welcoming congregation, we affirm the full inclusion of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. A very special welcome to any visitors with us this morning. If you'd like to get connected and learn more about our community life, please take a moment to fill out a yellow pew card located on the back of the seat in front of you, or sign the guest book in the vestibule. We hope you will join us for lunch downstairs in our fellowship hall following the service, which is reached through the door to the right of the sanctuary. As we have a chance to connect in person. Our child care staff person, Kiana Dubose, will not be with us this morning, so there will be no child care. We have a few announcements this morning. Today we are doing a different type of service. Reverend Janet and Kathleen Williams are going to offer some stories from our history, and we'll be showing slides of old photos. And then they're going to turn it over to Charles Nazarian to give a presentation of the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation's proposal for renovations to the sanctuary. So we'll be having the service and Charles's presentation here in the sanctuary. And when Charles is finished, we'll head downstairs for our potluck salad lunch. And Charles will be there to show the plans and answer questions. Visitors are very welcome to join us. And I already told you how to get to the social hall. We will still be voting on whether to approve the plans for the sanctuary at our annual meeting on June 23rd. So it's very important that everyone learn about the plans so you can make an informed decision. I mentioned salads. The membership team has organized a themed potluck lunch of different types of salads that we're looking forward to once our presentation is ended. One important note: we are not going to take up our usual collection this morning. Collection plates have been placed by the entrance and will be downstairs in the social hall as well. And we ask you to remember to contribute your offering as you pass by the plates. Thank you as always for your generosity. I seem to be missing a line of text, but it looks like the membership committee has decided to postpone the upcoming discussion of the Bill of Obligations. We encourage people to read the book as we head into the fall election. Again, it's the Bill of Obligations by Richard House. Our spiritual lives, led by Reverend Janet, will meet as usual at 4 p.m. on Wednesday. This coming Wednesday will be meditation here in the sanctuary. We offer an hour of sitting meditation, although you don't have to stay the entire time. And if anyone is interested, we stay for a short walking meditation at 5 p.m. Thank you.
Out of wood and stone, out of dreams and sacrifice, the people build a home. Out of the work of their hands and hearts and minds, the people fashion a symbol and a reality. May the rain fall lightly upon this house, the sun shine warmly, the winds blow softly, and bless it as a place of joy and of peace. Welcome, everyone. In the Unitarian Universalist faith tradition, we enter into worship by the simple ritual of kindling our chalice. We remember, as we light the flame, how our church has long served as a guiding light and a welcome home. May this flame warm our hearts, embolden our vision, and remind us of the light that we each carry within ourselves. Holly, the chalice is over there on the other table if you would light it for us now. And if you have a candle or a chalice prepared at home, we invite you to light yours as well with us now so you can participate in our weekly ritual. And we take a moment now to affirm the covenant that we share with one another. Newcomers and guests, the words are printed in your order of service if you'd like to read along with us. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. And now, I invite us to join in singing our opening hymn, number 358, in the great hymnal, Rank by Rank, Again We Stand. You're welcome to rise in body or in spirit. This morning's worship service is a bit of a departure from a typical Sunday morning. But then the moment in time in which this congregation finds itself is anything but routine, and it warrants the full participation and the consideration of all of us and beyond. So as you entered the building this morning, it would have been impossible not to notice the renovation of the alley taking place. In addition to restoring the alley to its historic appearance, we're also providing for our parking needs in a very creative and innovative way that will support healthy trees and lawn. And over the past few years, thanks to our partner, the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation, we have added fire suppression, sprinkler systems, restored the bell tower, and have addressed numerous projects to protect and enhance this amazing building and to preserve it for the future. And so, we are now ready to turn our attention to the interior. So we're describing this moment, beginning today, as dreaming big, because that is exactly what it took multiple times over the past 218 years to bring us to this point. What they dreamed to be ours to do, we just sang. This building and its humble predecessor that once stood several blocks down the street have touched 4 different centuries. And its members have played pivotal roles in some of the most important, defining, and even unpleasant times in the history of our country. Its clergy have been among the leading proponents of revolutionary, progressive, and consequential religious thought. The building itself is a monument to the federal period of architecture, and the interior reflects the evolving needs of the congregation and the community and the changing decorative style of its lifespan. From whale oil to LED bulbs, from no amplification to our own YouTube channel. Dreaming big is what we've always done. And dreaming big is what we continue to do. And dreaming big is what I'm asking us to do today.
Good morning. I'll start this presentation with a disclaimer and a confession. I began this project thinking I would collect some cool photographs of the building.
Let me see. Yes, it's okay where it is. I would just turn it off a little bit.
All right. Can you hear me now? All right. I began this presentation thinking I would collect some cool photographs of the building to share with you this morning. But spending time in the archives of this church, the files of the Cape Air Museum, and rereading Babson, Garland, and a host of others, I quickly realized it would be impossible to isolate the physical building from its people, from its role in the history of the United States, or especially from the radical changes in legal practice and religious thinking that it represents. So what Reverend Janet and I have for you today is not a comprehensive timeline of the last couple of centuries, but some of the highlights that stand out for anyone reflecting on its people or its past, along with some cool photographs. As for my confession, now that I have your attention, when I joined this church, I was drawn in by the building. Walking down the tree-lined alley provided me a moment to remove myself from the cares of the day. After I made it up those darn stairs, I was rewarded with the breathtaking entrance house. In short, wow. Entering the grand expanse of the sanctuary, I had the experience of being someplace very special, and I continue to have that experience each time I come here. Now, my t-shirt today is a takeoff on a quote by John Murray. He's credited with saying, "Give them not hell, but hope." Of course, I couldn't get all that on the t-shirt, so I paraphrased it. Hope, not hell.
And there's the man himself. We celebrate the birth of Universalism in America with the arrival of John Murray, depicted here. In 1770, he literally washed up on the shore in New Jersey and into the company of a self-taught Universalist farmer named Thomas Potter. Potter convinced Murray to share his message of universal hope and salvation, and to his surprise, Murray found eager listeners. So he preached his way up the coast to Boston, where he met Winthrop Sargent of Gloucester, who invited him to Gloucester, where he was momentarily delayed while the bridge was up. And initially, Murray was welcomed by the Congregationalists. Their minister was out on medical leave, as I remember. The Congregationalists, those Congregationalists, the state-supported religion, the standing order, the Calvinists, the hellfire and brimstone folks, first welcomed Murray into their pulpit. But as he gathered more and more supporters and they heard his message, the Congregationalists grew more and more impatient with his assertion that all people will be reconciled with a loving God. Whether you failed to pay your parking tickets, or whether you filled your bathtub with top-secret government documents, you would be reconciled. The defining moment came when Murray and his supporters broke ties with the Congregational Church and signed the Articles of Association of the Independent Church of Christ in 1779. And having outgrown the living rooms of their friends, even with their sergeants, they built their first meeting house a year later.
The first meeting house was a modest one-story wooden building, 32.5 by 48 feet, just over 1,500 square feet. They had 30 box pews, 13 of which were owned by Winthrop Sargent, and a little hand-cranked organ that had been seized from a British ship. So let's talk about that barrel organ for a second. Captain John Soames was a privateer, risking his life to seize ships that were a threat to the American colonies. So let's think about how that could have happened. So he captures this British vessel, jumps on the deck, brandishing his sword, and shouts, "Surrender your barrel organ." What about all the silver and the gold and the jewelry that was on board? Get the barrel organ, you hearties, and grab a couple of those silver things, and don't scratch the mahogany case. Really? But if you were Captain John Soames, you knew that there was a group of Universalists who were building their first meeting house, and they could sure use a barrel organ. 26 years later, when this building was built, the first meeting house was moved to a nearby farm where it was used for storage.
Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, John Murray and his new followers were anything but popular when they first began to make waves here along the coast of New England. And in fact, their now enemies at the First Parish began to publish pamphlets criticizing the Universalists. The Universalists fired back, of course. It was the 18th century equivalent of a Twitter war. The reality is we don't change much, ever. But pictured here is a quote from a First Parish pamphlet in 1785. It says, "And it is the opinion of the most judicious and feeling hearts among us that this man and his pernicious doctrines have been more damage to this town than the late war. For while this destroyed our interest, those have corrupted our morals in their first principles, broke up our peace, and deeply sowed the seeds of fell discord among us."
During the Revolutionary War, the British blockaded Gloucester Harbor. Nothing went in, nothing went out. The citizens of Gloucester were literally starving. Twice during the Revolution, Reverend Murray leveraged his personal connections to General George Washington and members of the Continental Army to secure provisions for the relief of Gloucester citizens, and he even kicked in some of his own money. And so it's a measure of how far apart the Congregationalists and the Universalists had become in their theology to say that Murray had caused more damage than the recent war.
So the conflict between the Congregationalists of First Parish and the Universalists continued to escalate. And we've told the story often of how in colonial times, taxes were collected from all citizens to fund the established church, which of course was the Congregational Church. The Universalists began to withhold their tax money and subsequently had their valuable property confiscated instead. They wanted their tax money to go to support their own church, and so they sued the First Parish. Now the case took a while to settle, but ultimately Murray and his followers prevailed, and the suit was settled in 1786. The court ruled that freedom of religion and compulsory support are incompatible. This was one step in the process that led to the separation of church and state that ultimately was enshrined in the United States Bill of Rights. But we weren't done yet. So a couple of years later, there was a revenge suit. The Congregationalists sued John Murray again, claiming that since he had not been properly ordained in a congregational church, that he was practicing unlawfully and that every rite of passage he had conducted was not valid. All weddings, funerals, baptisms that he had officiated at were questioned in their legitimacy, and he could be fined for each one that he conducted. So he petitioned the Massachusetts General Court to have his ordained status recognized, and then fled to England to avoid having to pay all this money which he did not have. So ultimately that suit was also settled in Murray's favor, and he returned home on a ship with John and Abigail Adams, making acquaintance with them. And once he was back here, he announced his engagement to Judith Sargent Murray, and just to be sure that this would not happen again, the congregation ordained him themselves for a second time on Christmas Day in 1788. How about that? 1805, the cornerstone was laid for the new building. The Masons were very involved in the process of doing that and helped install the cornerstone. 52 subscribers raised $10,000 from a population of 5,300 people. So the next year the building was dedicated. John Murray by this point had moved to Boston and was settled in a much larger Universalist church in Boston, but he came back up to participate in the service of dedication. And just looking at the picture, obviously you can see this would have been probably about where the Trinity parking lot is now, between Pine Street and Prospect. So I'm going to take over with the organs.
Music is an important expression of worship in this church, so we should take a minute to consider the organs that have provided this essential element. These instruments were made by some of the most renowned makers of their time and reflected the significance of this building as the first Universalist church in the country. The first was the little barrel organ. It came with 3 cylinders, each with 10 tunes. None were suitable for a church service, so a 4th cylinder was made with 10 hymn tunes that were played over and over and over. Boston craftsman Thomas Appleton built the organ that was installed in 1826. The next organ came from Salem builders Elias and George Hook in 1844. The Hook brothers were regarded as the leading organ building company in the country. Finally, the organ that we hear in our services today was constructed in 1893 by George Hutchings from Boston. Hutchings learned his trade from, guess who? The Hook brothers. The instrument was extensively restored and improved by C.B. Fisk in Gloucester in 1962. To give you a sense of the quality of Hutchings' instruments, they can be found in the Boston Music Hall, Old South Church, Trinity Church, Church of the Advent, and Symphony Hall. Not to mention here. Now, the trees were planted on the alley in 1828. As we look at these exterior photos, notice how the walkway seems quite narrow in some photos and wider in others. The trees may have been replaced a few times. Sometimes there are 8 trees, sometimes there are 10.
We threw this in for the fun of it. We threw this slide in for the fun of it. This is an early attempt at marketing and publicity. It's from 1863, and it's an invitation to attend our Easter services. If you read the fine print, we were struck by the level of patronizing language that we thought it sounded a little bit condescending and not what we would call welcoming by today's standards, but referring to other religions as primitive. So this was just a quick reminder that though we dream big, we are not always our best selves. We're calling this Next segment, a century of celebrations. The lawsuits have been settled, the building was built. Father Jones, who's shown over here on this wall here, was the pastor for 40 years. And the new building, Universalism was growing all around the country. Gloucester was growing. And so the Universalists were very eager to celebrate all their milestones and their accomplishment and their anniversaries. So we'll see two major celebrations that took place and that spurred renovation projects to accommodate their dreams of their success. So, 1870, we had a centennial here in Gloucester. You can see the copy of the program over there on the right. 10,000 people attended from all over the country. To accommodate this, to get ready for it, the building in 1868 was lifted 7 feet so that they could build the vestry underneath it. The staircase in the entry house was installed, and, wonder of wonders, the whale oil chandelier was replaced with a gaslight fixture. Now, this is one of my favorite photos of all time. This shows how we accommodated the 10,000 guests to Gloucester. There was a tent encampment on Stage Fort Park. You know, it's our 250th is coming up if you want to recreate this. I'm just mentioning. This is the back of that card that I just showed you with the description of the event. Gloucester, September 20th through the 23rd, 1870. 4 days of celebrations of Universalism in Gloucester. There was a large tent that was displayed in the photo where they held their day meetings, and it could accommodate 8,000 people under its canvas. So the rest of it is just kind of a description of Stage Fort Park, which we don't need to go into any detail. There's obviously our gorgeous staircase in the entrance house. And here's just a truly lovely photo of the Allée in 1870. With the charm here is just remarkable. But we also wanted to show it to you because you can really see the new steps, the new granite steps that were installed, because obviously the building was no longer at ground level. Here's a view of the church in the distance. Is a view from City Hall Tower, which would have been a novelty back then. I think this would have been 2 years old in 1871 when this photo was taken. But this is the First Parish Church in the foreground. That's where Trinity is now, and then our church there in the background. And then 4 years later, we had another celebration. It was the 100th anniversary of John Murray's first preaching here in Gloucester. And as I mentioned a second ago, 2024 is the 250th, so let's get ready to invite 10,000 people to Gloucester. I'll be in touch.
This is the 1884 floor plan of the sanctuary. The numbering system is kind of crazy. It starts with number 1 in the back corner, up to 19 here, 20 here, and 38 in the back, so it kind of snakes its way across the building. Now, according to this diagram, there are 114 pews. And if we could get 5 people into a pew, do the math, we could have up to 570 people seated just on the floor, not to say what's available on the balcony as well. Now, just to give you a sense of how Gloucester had grown in the last 100 years, in 1780 the population was about 5,300, and now in 1880 the population had tripled to over 19,000. All right, what's going on here? The first time I saw this picture, I was like, does the fire marshal know about this? I'll bet there wasn't a single evergreen tree standing in all of Cape Ann when the Universalists were done decorating for Christmas that year. The sad thing is, we lost 2 altos and 1 tenor from the choir. We still haven't found them. All right, if you could look past the holiday arboretum thing going on here, there's some really interesting points. If you look at the opening for the organ, On both sides, there are a series of archways and columns with elaborate capitals. These look like they're three-dimensional, like they're set into the wall, but they're not. This is all done with paint on a flat surface. This is trompe-l'oeil. It even seems to carry through into the organ opening. On the right arch is the Lord's Prayer. On the left arch is the 23rd Psalm, and a quote from the Bible below. In 1886, the organ would have been Hook Brothers. We'll show you how we do Christmas these days.
All right. This was again one of those, this is irresistible.
Sound louder?
From celebrations to finances, from the sublime to the mundane. On the left you see the church budget from 1891 on one small card. And so there's the expense side of operations. And on the back of this card was printed to answer your question of how did we finance church operations. And it was financed by the rental of the pews. And so the back of the card was the invitation to come to the annual rental evening. So this raises some questions. What happens if you miss the meeting? Did you have to stand in the back for the year? And for those of you who are not fond of the system we currently have in place, which is to ask people to pledge annually, this is always a possibility to go back to. So, again, just mention it.
In 1891, we celebrated the 150th anniversary of the birth of John Murray. Murray was born in England in 1741. Brought up in the Calvinist tradition, he became a follower of the Universalist teachings of James Relly. After the loss of his wife, a son who was only a year old, 3 sisters, and 1 brother, Mary looked to America for a new start in 1770. Here's an exterior shot of the church from about 1900. Now, there's a closer-up view. We can see the wooden banner that was hung over the doorway indicating the First Universalist Society in America. 1905 was the 100th anniversary of the laying of the cornerstone of the church. Along with the cornerstone was placed a $20 gold piece, which has not been found yet. If you happen to find it, we would encourage you to drop it in the collection today. I'm not sure the date of this picture, but you can see they've placed what looks like a wooden walkway from the street to the front stairs. Now the first thing we notice here is the windows. This was taken before the stained glass was installed, so we see the clear glass windows with their shutters. Notice the decorative stenciling that runs all along the ceiling at the sanctuary. The stenciling runs across the ceiling and also around the sanctuary at the chair rail height. We also see the gas fixture that has replaced the glass chandelier for many years. Now this is an interior looking forward from the balcony. Remember all that trompe-l'oeil painting around the opening of the organ we saw in the 1880s? It's now been replaced with decorative stenciling. The organ is now by Hutchings, and we see the choir facing towards the congregation. The stairway from the balcony to the sanctuary floor comes later in 1948, along with the fire door on the left side of the balcony. Up front, we see John Murray's desk and the barrel organ. The Cape Ann Museum dates this image from the 1920s, but it appears to be earlier than that because the stained glass windows have not yet been installed.
So we see here that the memorial windows were installed by 1916 and celebrated. There was a service of dedication for them, and a very big piece in the Gloucester Daily Times describing the windows and all of the donors and the people being memorialized. So we dreamed big back in 1916 when these windows were installed. And I also wanted to say that we made the front page regularly back in those days. One reason we were in the news a lot was our very plain-spoken minister at the time, the Reverend Dr. Levi Powers. I could go on about him for the rest of the service, but there are a few highlights. He was a pacifist during World War I and quite outspoken about it. At one point, he was quoted in the paper as saying, "I don't have to live in Gloucester, but I do have to live with myself." But my favorite story about Levi Powers was that in 1915 and 1916, he was the chaplain to the city council, and so he gave the prayers at their inauguration services. And he spoke his mind, and he named names. And in 1915, he said a few things like, "We pray for the retiring mayor. He might have done better, and he knows it. And now we are sending him to the State House. We pray for those who must guide our city in this coming year. There is Alderman Daniel Marshall. You know what a good..." Sorry, I can't read this very well. "We know what a good fellow he is, and how everyone likes him." And so that is, he named absolutely everybody. And even with that, he was invited back the next year. I'm sure there was an overflow crowd, and again, it made the front page of the paper. It was called "The Prayer That Startled Gloucester," because it began, "We pray, therefore, first of all, for the voters of this city. There are some too lazy to vote, but not too lazy to grumble. Bless them." All right, moving ahead to 1920, the 150th anniversary of Universalism in America. There was, the centerpiece was a pageant of the life of John Murray held at Stage Fort Park with 300 actors. And you can see some of the dreaming that went on for some of the things that they hoped to accomplish in honor of this anniversary. And particularly note the prices of some of the things that they were budgeting that they wanted to do, such as purchase some additional houses on Main Street as well as the Sargent House. And adjusted for inflation today, they were proposing to spend $718,000. But of course, the entertaining piece of this was that they decided to look for home hospitality to pick up the thousands of people who would be attending once again. And so you can see the ads from the newspaper over there on the right. "These people must sleep. Have you a room for them? You should have a room for us." I mean, it was very direct. There was no more talk of staying in tents, and my guess is that this had more to do with the advent of indoor plumbing, which raised the bar, and it was decided that people being put up in local homes was the best approach. And again, here's the official program from the anniversary celebration, the Murray Pilgrimage to Gloucester. And then during this era as well, the church's minister, Levi Powers, was instrumental in establishing the Sargent House Museum. It was being used as a rooming house. And Dr. Powers made contacts with people at the Society for the Preservation of New England Antiquities, now known as Historic New England, and with people at Harvard, and even a Sargent descendant, Charles Sargent from Harvard. And so he built this coalition of people to figure out how to raise the money to preserve the building and to create an organization to run it. But he was instrumental in doing this. And if you go over to the Sargent House, there's a sculpture or a fountain on the grounds of the Sargent House that are dedicated to Levi Powers. So, yet another example of dreaming big. And pause for a minute and think about what Middle Street would be like without this church anchoring this end and the Sargent House just down the street.
This is a good image to compare to the photo we saw from 1870. Here's the walkway, it's fairly narrow. when it was a full width reopening from the street in the earlier photo. The granite posts, at least on the Middle Street side, have square caps. The gates are quite simple and the same design as the double tubular rows that connect the granite posts. In the 1870 photo, we saw vertical divisions. Now, the initial description of the property that this church was built on was, it was pretty swampy, but it looks like the kids didn't mind at all.
We had an active social life. But it's a little, in times, a little cringy. In my introduction, I alluded to the fact that along with all of our accomplishments, there were times when we did some things that are a little incompatible with Unitarian Universalist principles. And this is an example of the fact that one of their big social activities and fundraisers in the 1930s and 40s was to put on minstrel shows. And even though we celebrate having had a freed slave as one of our founding members, and of our universalist values about all people being held in the love of God, here we are. So minstrelsy originated in the 1830s, and it was kind of a backlash movement for people angry about what they perceived as others, the other, encroaching on their economic and social success. And they used minstrelsy as a way to vent their frustrations and to affirm their own footing in a dominant white culture by putting down others, making fun of others. So it's sad to see that a century after they began, minstrel shows continued to be a very popular form of entertainment, completely accepted. Newspaper reports from the 1940s, so later than this, even mentioned that the minister at the time, Reverend Leon Simonetti, played the piano for the minstrel shows. So while this is somewhat cringeworthy in general, I especially cringe when I saw that the names that the lady performers gave themselves, the classy colored collegians, and did they not notice that that's spelled KKK? As I said, we have not always been our best selves.
Moving right along. We are in 1948. The building is now 142 years old, and although this is not a significant anniversary year, it's time to change and grow. The building was closed for 18 months during construction. The sanctuary was repainted. So we've gone from trompe-l'oeil to decorative stenciling to no decoration in the sanctuary. The addition was added with offices and classrooms. Importantly, the floor was reinforced with steel girders, and the whole structure was supported with the columns we see in the vestry now. A stairway was added from the balcony to the sanctuary floor, and another stairway added from the entrance house to the area behind the stage. The congregation was able to raise $78,000 to make these changes. In today's money, that would be more than $1 million. Great example of dreaming big.
We haven't talked much about the role of women in the church. In 1852, a ladies' society was established that was very active for many, many years. And in 1929, the Judith Sargent Murray Guild was formed for the younger ladies of the congregation. They took Judith Murray as their role model as one of the country's earliest advocates for equal rights for women, and an author in her own right who wrote a Universalist catechism. And she was also a poet and a playwright, and credited as the first woman to have a public performance of a play that she wrote in this country. So they named their society after Judith. And they were very busy and active for a very long time, and particularly in social events and in raising money for the church. They had a robust program of annual events, created a wonderful, welcoming social environment, and church dinners. Some of you might remember the birthday dinners, the calendar dinners, I think they were called. They had a big celebration every year on Washington's birthday, and they raised a great deal of money for the church by hosting baby showers and bridal showers downstairs in the vestry. And of course, the Guild is no longer active, but we think that maybe Judy Williams, who is living out with her family in Montana now, might possibly be the last member of the Guild. But we remember them fondly for working so hard on behalf of this church. The church is part of the Neighborhood National Historic District for Middle Street, and efforts are underway to get it listed in its own right, which will help us access additional funding from preservation societies.
Over the years, there have been a number of studies to project the cost of various restorations and projects. The one done in 1986 estimated the need for $650,000. In today's money, that would be over $1.8 million. What do we call that? Dreaming big. 1980s, the work on the tower, you can see it was completely draped in scaffolding at the time.
And here's the publicity about it. The members of the church are to be commended for their determination to see the project through. And so we did. We dream big, and we also sweat the small stuff. And where would we be without all of our volunteers over the years? So I'm going to embarrass Jay McLaughlin, who's sitting right here, yet again, and to say thank you, Jay, for the many hours of work that you put into rebuilding our beautiful chancel that, of course, right now is obscured by the screen. But you can see it every Sunday morning. Jay, in particular, I will never forget the giant rat's nest you found.
More recent work improved the efficiency of the building with thermal insulation in the walls, added protection with a fire detection and suppression system, and a generator to keep the building operational in the event of an extended power outage. An extensive restoration of the tower secured it from water damage, replaced the windows in the tower and much of the wooden trim, along with a fresh coat of paint, and the tower is back to looking just fabulous.
Here we go. So, in closing, first of all, I want to thank Kathleen Williams for finding all these photos, assembling them, doing all the work, making the t-shirts, and just making this possible. I would not have been able to do it without you. But we wanted to leave you with this excerpt from the 1958 Civic Arts Committee, a quote from Walker Hancock, the famous sculptor. In the eyes of posterity, the Universalist Church, the birthplace of Universalism, will undoubtedly be the most important monumental building that the city possesses. Its exceptionally fine proportions and detail and the great beauty of its tower make it one of the most precious examples of American architecture of its period. And before we sing our closing hymn, I want to leave you with the words of the Reverend Dr. Levi Powers, taken from his farewell sermon to this congregation in May of 1919. He said this: "In leaving here, my interest in this church and city will not cease. It never can cease. I love this old church. I love its long history. I love its honorable place in the city and the nation. I feel myself most fortunate to have had some part in its continuing life. It is worthy of a place of pride in the heart of every citizen of Gloucester. It deserves the most loyal devotion of all its members. You cannot do too much for it. You should be glad to have your names on its rolls of membership. You should consider it a privilege to provide for its future. Amen, Dr. Powers. And now, before we hear from Charles Nazarian, let's sing together hymn number 1 in the great hymnal, May Nothing Evil Cross This Door.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning. Morning.
Can you hear me clearly enough?
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Let me also add my thanks to Kathleen Williams and to Reverend Janet. When we first talked about doing this service, I asked Kathleen if she might be interested in putting together a set of historical photographs. And within a week, I got an email with some of the most incredible things that you saw today. She dove into it with all her spirit, I would say. So I make another round of applause for Kathleen. You can see on this set of drawings that the date is 2022. And that might be a little bit surprising because here we are in 2024, but the work which is envisioned here has still not begun, and even the major fundraising for it, a capital campaign, which was envisaged at that time, did not go forward. There were a number of reasons for this. One is coming out of the COVID period. Another was that one of our major donors had made a 2-year commitment to the library of 6 figures, and we found that others weren't quite convinced yet about the investment in the Universalist Church. We found that there were people who said, well, are you really sure that this is worth doing? And we were, and still are, talking about a $3 million capital campaign, which, in the context of what you've just seen, seems rather small. The renovations that have occurred to this building over time are really quite amazing. And the one which you heard about for the centennial in 1868 is probably the most incredible one because of lifting the entire building, tower and all. And at that point, you can imagine in the days of horse and buggies and oxen, lifting a building of this scale is such an amazing undertaking. It makes anything that we're thinking about doing today seem rather small. But they did it because of the centenary, and also they did some things that are not entirely obvious. For example, not only did they add that 7 or 8 feet of brick that you see on the outside, but they disconnected the original floor, which I'm sitting and you're sitting on, and they lifted it within the perimeter of the building in order to get enough headroom for the social hall downstairs. And this was something that wasn't obvious to us at first, but as we began to study the building more, we wondered why the wainscoting and the windows are so low relative to this floor, but upstairs they're 2 feet taller. And some more investigation proved that the original floor, if you had walked in 1806, would have been level with the entrance house. And that bit of information figures into what I'm going to tell you about the proposed renovation, because what we have inherited, and we are really the caretakers of this building. We are not its owners. We are really its caretakers if we think of it in terms of posterity. We need to know what was done before and what we can do to enhance it, and especially not to harm it. Those of you who know the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation's birth was conceived as a way to take the burden of restoring this building off of the shoulders of the congregation. I remember very well, early when I became a member here in 2005, having a conversation with Holly Tangway. And I looked around and I said, why hasn't this building been restored? Why is the balcony in such a terrible state? And Holly said, well, you know, it's far bigger than our needs, and probably it's far bigger than our needs will ever be. But my instinct was, well, it's not about us, it's not about the present congregation, it's about the building itself and also its potential of what it can do in terms of the community. And we've seen this happen many, many times. For example, the first major concert that the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation produced was the Bach B minor Mass with a full Baroque orchestra and musica sacra, a choir from Boston of 35 singers. And this room was absolutely full, and the balcony was as full as we are allowed to get it. Well, I'm going to segue from that into the present day. In the last couple of years, we've had a number of memorial services here that have brought 350 or so people into the building. And Reverend Janet can tell you that on one of those occasions, I was seated under the balcony, and I was looking up at the number of people who were seated upstairs and remembering the words of our structural engineer from 2009, who told me, when I asked him, well, how many people can we have in the balcony? And he said, well, up to 50, I would think would be safe. And I said, well, what happens? And he said, let me put it to you this way. When it goes, it's going to go fast. Because there comes a point that anybody who knows structure knows that there's a tipping point at which something finally reaches that moment at which it no longer has the strength to hold. And so I remember Reverend Janet looking at me, and I was looking at her, and I was looking at the cracks in the ceiling and thinking, And at that particular service, somebody sat on a pew upstairs where they weren't supposed to, and it broke. And there was an enormous crash. And I thought, oh my God. However, we were fortunate. So one of the things that the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation had as one of its primary goals from the beginning, to restore this building as a civic hub, as an entertainment venue, and as a place for the community. And when we think of it in that regard, we have to think of it differently than we think of it as church members, in which, regrettably, we don't have 300 or 400 people here on a Sunday morning, or as they did back in the day, perhaps 500 people in this building on Sundays on a regular basis. We may never see that time return when that many people come to church, but people do come into this building with a sense of sacredness. And just this weekend, we had Chef Abbott's premiere of his film, Gloucester Speaks, on Friday night. We had a very good crowd. Yesterday afternoon, we had Nubar Alexander's film, Finding Armenia, and we had a very good crowd. And people come into this space and they are inspired. People ask you about it. How did it come to be here? Why didn't we know it was here? How has it survived when all the other buildings have not? And so this is our inspiration for dreaming big, for wanting to put this sanctuary back together so that it has close to the 500 seats it originally did. Now, to do that takes some doing. And one of those things is related again to structure. And many of you have looked around the building and wondered about these iron rods that are supporting the gallery. Those were part of the 1868 renovation. In the 1868 renovation, these curved pews were installed. And at that time, there was a movement in America among Methodists and other Protestant denominations, including Universalists, for worship in the round. And in fact, many of them built churches that were actually semicircular in form. And the idea was that the congregation would feel that they were together in the space, as opposed to the way this building started out with box pews, in which people were somewhat isolated into their individual place, and their communication with each other was kind of boxed off, if you will. So in 1868, when they lifted the building, they eliminated the columns, which originally stood one under each of these iron rods was a classical column that helped hold up the balcony. And the study that we had done in 2009 with a $11,000 grant from the Essex National Heritage told us that we had two options. We could either restore the columns under the gallery and support them from below, or we could double the number of rods, and we would have to completely redo the truss work in the attic in order to hold the weight. And the reason for this is that according to our current building codes, we have to calculate the weight of the balcony itself as well as the weight of people. So the weight of the balcony itself is called a dead load. I realize that doesn't sound good. And the people are the live load. That sounds better. So when you combine the dead load and the live load, you have to accommodate that to the current building code standards. So this is what we're about. The primary aspect of the interior renovation, starting from the social hall downstairs, is to provide the strength in order to support the gallery so that the seats upstairs can be restored. and we will have a 500 plus seat auditorium with the finest acoustics on the North Shore, if not in New England. I am reminded of a concert that we had early on in which a small ensemble came up from Boston, from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, and performed in our space. And the principal harpist of the Boston Symphony was stationed right in front of the pulpit and reading desk. And after the concert, I was chatting with her, and I asked her how she liked the room. And she said, I have to tell you that of all the rooms I've played in, with the one exception of Symphony Hall, this is the finest room that I have ever played in and where I would want to come back. And so we have not only a precious legacy in terms of the architecture of the building, but we also have a precious legacy in terms of a room that is perfect for music and still clear as a bell for the spoken word. So Kathleen, if you could go to the next slide, please. Here you can see the first floor. This is a plan view, what we architects call a plan view, as if you were looking at all of the elements of the social hall level. And I'm going to thank Jerry Ackerman for giving me a pointer here so that I can inform you. For example, this is where the kitchen is today. This is the short lift that brings you down from the Church Street door. This is the large lift that brings you upstairs. And this is the area of the social hall, and this is the backstage area. Now, this is something really, really fascinating. In 1947, when the building received the current office wing, they put a steel crib under the wood floor. And that steel crib, whether by accident or design, and the outer piece of steel is here and here, just happens to line up perfectly with the front of the balcony. Now, we don't know if they did it on purpose, but they left us with a gift, because the steel under the floor here actually lines up perfectly so that we can install a set of columns, which you can see here, these little circles here, 3 on either side, in addition to the ones that are currently downstairs. And they will line up perfectly with each of the columns here in the sanctuary. And they gave us another gift, which is unbelievable to me, but they put an enormous I-beam where the proscenium is for the stage downstairs. And this just happens to be where the 2 other columns, if you look behind you, here and here, those were where the 2 rear columns once stood, and they just happened to be almost directly above the piece of steel that was inserted in 1947. So our work then is greatly aided by this. However, we do need to add those 3 columns on this side and this side directly underneath where they will be located here. We have had a structural engineer study whether we can make do with the existing ones, and it would mean taking the entire steel crib apart, putting it all back together again, meeting the current code. The difference between a $30,000 project and a $130,000 project. So 3 columns on either side makes good Yankee sense, if you ask me. We'll go to the next slide. So here we are now at the sanctuary level, and you may remember from the antique slide that we saw, this is our array of views. And here, these little round circles are the locations of the columns which we are proposing to put back in. directly underneath the gallery where they once were. And once those are in and standing on the post below, the gallery will meet the current code. We'll be able to have up to 275 people upstairs, and by my count, about 300 people fit down here. So it's actually a very considerable number, plus the number of people who might be up in the organ loft or performing at the front. There are also some very interesting things that you need to know that would go with the renovation. As you saw in the slides, we have today our original whale oil chandelier back, and we still drop it to the floor the way they used to drop it to the floor to fill it with whale oil. It's on a cantilever and a counterweight, and it cranks down to the floor. Today, we put LED bulbs in it, but the concept is the same. But in the 1868 renovation, they didn't just add a gas fixture here. They added sconces between every window, all the way along the walls at the first level, and when we go upstairs, you'll see at the other levels. So when we were doing the insulation of these walls, the walls were filled 12 inches thick with insulation. We discovered that the copper piping that fed gas to those original sconces was still in the wall. And we were able, therefore, to prove to ourselves exactly where the gas sconces were. And if you look on the walls here, upstairs, you'll see that we have installed an electrical cover, and there is new conduit that runs up into the attic so that we can put back the gas electric fixtures that were once there, going back to the 1868 renovation. If you've been in this room at night, you know how dark it can be underneath the balcony or upstairs. But by adding these sconces all the way around the building, for the first time, we'll be able to light this room the way it really should be done. You can also see something interesting here, and I'm just going to allude to it briefly, which is the beautiful staircase which was installed in the 1868 renovation. The original staircase, if you had come here in 1806, was a very simple stair that ran straight up one side and straight up the other. And if you could go to the next slide, Kathleen. You would have come up this flight of stairs, and the pipe organ, the first one, significant one, aside from the barrel organ, which was built by Thomas Appleton, that was located here, and its bellows stuck out the back of the wall here. And if you go into the entrance house, you can still see the cutout where the bellows went out on a little platform in back of where the Appleton organ was. Let me just say a word about Thomas Appleton while we're passing this by. The Appleton instruments are considered the greatest pedigree of early American organ building. And if you go to New York, to the Museum of Art, you will find that there is an Appleton organ in one of the large galleries, and it's one of their treasures. Our Appleton instrument, unfortunately, we have no record of where it went. It was probably purchased off of the shop floor in the 1820s. But the hook organ that replaced it is still playing in a church in northern Vermont, and our former organist actually went there on an organ crawl and played it. So that tells you something about an instrument from the 1840s still playing. The current instrument and the choir, of course, occupied this area. Now, while we're upstairs, another part of the renovation plan is to restore all of the plaster and the ceiling, and to some degree, and we don't yet know to what degree, to restore some of the trompe l'oeil or stenciling that you saw. We have a bit of a problem there because the original stenciling from 1868, which has the arches and the inscriptions, the Bible verse, the Psalm 23, we're not entirely sure we want to put all of that back. And on the other hand, there's a beautiful stenciling pattern from the time that the later instrument came in that you saw in the photographs. And that is sort of an Edwardian style. And a joint committee of the church and the foundation are going to have to work out some of these details. What do we keep? What do we put back? How do we allude to these different layers of time? Now, I want to point this out to you because there are some churches that have a very simple restoration path. For example, our sister church in Newburyport, the First Unitarian Society, their building, it still has its box pews. It still has its clear glass windows. It still looks the way it did for the most part when it was built in the 1820s. So restoring it is pretty simple. You make sure that everything is in good condition and that it looks like it did. But Gloucester being Gloucester and our history being what it is, we have a layered history. We have a building in which many periods are represented, like the windows from the First World War period. And so our building, and I've had this discussion with the people from Massachusetts Historical, is a teaching building. It brings people in and they can see the different eras and how those eras affected it. And so just like Gloucester itself, which is so diverse and sometimes messy, admittedly, it also speaks to who we are. Go to the next slide. This is what the attic looks like in plan view. And I'm not going to explain all of this to you, but I'm just going to tell you that right now, these little dark areas that you see, those are the places where the steel pipe is attached to the trusses. And all of that then suspends the gallery. And if you go upstairs and jump up and down on the gallery, you'll find that it moves. And it has to move a little bit because it's all suspended. But I don't tell people that when they come here for concerts. Next slide, please. This is what the room looks like if you cut it as like it was a cake and you cut it the lengthwise. This is what's called a section. And here, you can see in the section, I put the columns back where they would go directly underneath where the rods are today. And the rods that are there will disappear with the exception of the front pair. The front pair will get cut off about 3 feet from the ceiling, and all of our theater lighting, all of the lighting for our services will all go up against the ceiling and not down here as it is today. And that, with remote control and a system good enough for a theater, which is in our plans, will be controlled from a desk at the back. So for example, we have a sponsor who has asked us to put on T.S. Eliot's play, The Cocktail Party, next year, and he's willing to pay for it. And so next year we're going to have our first real theater event here in this building. But with this kind of lighting, we could do a great deal more of that. So multimedia starts to become increasingly important to us. Another aspect of that multimedia is that there will be a hidden place in the ceiling here for us to attach hooks for a screen like this one, so that we don't have to put the screen up. Every time we do this, costs us $500 or $600. But we'll have a couple of very discrete spots in the ceiling that will allow us to just hook the screen on and put it up. And we'll be ready to go. So, I told you that in 1868, they did something strange. They created a 2-foot space here when they lifted the sanctuary floor 2 feet above the entrance house floor. And I can take you into the hallway near the Church Street door at the forward end, and you can actually peer into that 2-foot space. Why am I telling you this? I'm telling you this because that's where the air conditioning ducts are going to go that keep this floor cool. And that whole area under here was also somewhat ready-made for us to insert ductwork, which will then provide us with the opportunity for air conditioning and also for heating, hopefully all electric eventually. And there is also another small gift which you have all seen but probably never paid attention to. And that is on either side of the sanctuary, there is a notch and a column. Those were chimneys. And this one has been cut off. But this one still provides a chimney for our gas-fired boiler. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to replicate those at the back of the sanctuary, back in that corner and that corner, and those are going to have the vertical ducts that carry the conditioned air up to the next level. So we've really been given, sort of breadcrumbs through the forest to follow here on how we restore the building. Go to the next slide, please. This is another section, and this is cutting through the building the other way. Here's the Willard clock, and here's another pair of columns. And notice right here, this is that massive piece of steel that was put in 1947 and allows us to rest the 2 columns at the back without adding columns in the middle of the proscenium. You could go to the next one. This also shows you another interesting feature of the building. In the gallery, this is cutting through the balcony now. You can see here's a column and here's a beam. Originally, there were box pews upstairs, but in the 1868 renovation, they created the steps that we see today. And there is a nice big empty space in here. And this is another area which we've actually gone into when we insulated the walls. And this will also hide the ductwork for the new heating and air conditioning system. So the building is kind of just waiting for us to do this. It's got all the bones just waiting for us to flesh them out. This is also an interesting feature. This is what our trusses look like. And they're very unusual because the first truss supports the ceiling with this big beam. And then there's a second framing area that supports our slate roof. This is quite unusual. And right now, these are the rods they've been cut off, but this is where the rods are located, and they're hanging from this truss, and they're putting it under quite a lot of pressure. So this is another reason why we couldn't suspend the gallery unless we doubled all of them up and rebraced all of these, which we eventually came to the conclusion was just not practical. Next slide, please. And then this is now looking in the direction of where the pipe organ is today. Here is the reading desk. Here you can see the 2 balconies on either side. And this is the door that goes out to the fire escape. In a later renovation, it may be possible that we will do something that they wanted to do in 1947, and that's add another floor to the office wing. They weren't able to afford it. We have the drawings that show us going up another flight of stairs. So we do have the option in the future of actually putting another door out of the sanctuary to another set of offices at this level by coming across this area and matching the doors, but they'll be nicer looking doors than what we have over here. And the one window, the one original window that we have, which you cannot see from the inside, is this one. But the one window we have left over from 1806, you can see from the outside. It's a 12 over 12 double hung window. And I encourage you to go outside and have a look at it. It's the one sanctuary window that we have left. And it's another kind of nice artifact left over for us. So that's our hope. Our hope is to completely renovate this space, but to leave all of the wonderful artifacts and all of the periods in view. And we hope that you will vote in favor of us going ahead at the annual meeting. And we also hope that when we are ready to do the capital campaign, that you'll help us get the word out, and we'll somehow manage to raise $3 million. To date, we've spent on the building and now the green a little over $1 million. And what's happening out at the green is mostly financed through the Massachusetts Cultural Council and through the Community Preservation Act, plus some private gifts. And I couldn't be more thankful for all of you and the people who have supported us during this first 9 years of the Meeting House Foundation. Thank you so much for giving me the privilege of taking care of this building as best as I know how. Thank you.
But wait, there's more. Back here. I just wanted to invite everybody to head downstairs now for salads and lunch and to continue the conversation. So Charles will be there with the plans and